I'm Peter Hackett. I'm the chairman of the theater department here at Dartmouth, and I've heard so many wonderful things here today that I want to respond to and will later in our group discussions, but I am not of the generation that is a multitasker. So I'm going to focus on a very narrow point of view at the moment. I'm in the middle with my colleague Ford Evans from the Dartmouth Dance Ensemble and Jeff James in the Hopkins Center. We're in the middle of a 2-year pilot project where we are trying to create new work on campus. And we've set some parameters for ourselves. And in this process, I should say, we have been bumping into a lot of the questions that are being raised today, including those about cell phones and Twitters and what are they doing in the front rows and the back rows of the house, the students now I'm talking about. But the parameters we set for ourselves on this project, we've completed our first. We're moving on to our second, which will premiere late next year. We want this work to be interdisciplinary, and I mean that in Dartmouth's definition of that, meaning we want to include at least one non-arts department in the work. The work needs to be original, and it should have collective authorship, so the students are very much involved in creating these pieces. We also are choosing topics. If we're going to talk about what brings young people into the theater, we are asking them about what are topics that are relevant to you. And I think Sylvia Spears hit the nail on the head when she said, our community, which is largely students, do want to see themselves represented in the work, the artwork that we do. In our first pilot project, which we just completed this spring, it was a 65-minute dance, theater, video, computer science project called Viscera, which focused on war and all of its ramifications. And our non-arts collaborator in that was the Department of Computer Sciences. As we begin evolving our second project and talking to the students about what they would like to focus on and what we would like to focus on, we would like to add to that group, hopefully, music. I'm going to have a conversation with my colleague Michael Casey, Women and Gender Studies, and the Dartmouth Health Services. So given the sort of trenches that I'm in at the moment, and this is my home art center, my home performance space, my classroom, I've created a Santa's wish list, which I haven't done since I was about 6 years old, about the things that I would like to see happen. And by the way, I'll just say that I'm a graduate of Dartmouth, and I was here studying theater shortly after this building opened. And so I have the perspective of having learned in this art center as a student and then coming back and working and teaching in this art center much, much later. On my wish list at the top are flexible laboratory spaces, and by that I mean spaces in which the project will define the space and use of space rather than the space defining the project. I would also like the flexible laboratory spaces to allow us to define, depending on how the project evolves, our relationship with the audience. And one thing that we have begun to learn as we perform with the students and for the students, that interaction is a very important part of their reason for coming and attending. And interaction can mean authorship, it can mean actual participation, it can mean seeing themselves represented in the work, it can be the relevance of the work, it can be as part of soliciting feedback or discussion. So it takes all sorts of different things. I was particularly affected by Michael Gordon's comment at the beginning when he said, do you really want students to walk into a hall like this, which looks like just every other hall they're in all day long? And I know some of you are getting tours of the Hopkins Center later today. It might be useful to you to tour some of the class spaces on campus and see where the students are coming from when they come into this space, and shouldn't we be offering them an alternative? Second on my list is what I call creative work areas. You heard Carol Folt at the beginning of the discussion talk about the original concept of the Hopkins Center was to gather all the arts under one roof. I would say that maybe in the 21st century we create spaces to gather all artists under one roof. One of the most interesting conversations I've had in the last year has been with a colleague of mine who I was put together with somewhat accidentally for President Kim's inauguration, a colleague of mine from brain sciences who was studying creativity in the brain. And as we sat there and we talked together, we realized that we have a lot in common, maybe even more than I have in common with some of my colleagues in the theater department in terms of what our interests are and what we're focusing on. So where are the spaces where we can get together? Laurie Loeb, who was our professor with her students from computer sciences who participated in the first of these projects, said when it was over, she says, I would love to be in the theater department. Well, we'd love to have her. So when she's working on a project like this, where are the places where those other members of the campus, their students can congregate inside this building? I will go a nod to Ben Cameron, who talked about transparency. Absolutely. I think one of the big things as an educator that we're missing here is the fact that our work is not transparent and not visible to our students every hour of every day. Rather, we're asking them to show up at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever it is on a particular day, and see the results. But wouldn't it be much more interesting if they were actually able to watch, either actively or passively, watch the process of the creation of these pieces, so that when they do come at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock, later, a year later, there's an investment in what it is they're going to see. So transparency, absolutely. And finally, community spaces. It seems to me that of all things, the center, we've been talking about the purpose of art centers, and I think someone mentioned earlier that they've been built to be primarily shells for performance spaces, and I would like to say that perhaps we should put the community center at the center of the performing arts space. One of our students who was involved, one of the student artists involved in the project that we just completed, said in a discussion afterwards, she was a dancer, and she said, you know, I always concentrated on my movement when I performed and the quality of how I moved and what I did and the choreography, but I never knew that I could make a piece that would make people think about important things. And how wonderful it would have been to have a bar, social center, whatever, in this building to capture the energy of that conversation, which clearly happened elsewhere as people left this building. And let's remind ourselves that the students' evening begins at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Mine ends before that, but that's when they begin their work. I remember finally, when I was a student here, one of the great trophies you could get was a key to the Hopkins Center. You'd sneak one, or you would cut a deal with the security officer who would patrol the building at night, so you could get in here after midnight to do your work, and that was when the fun really happened. So, thank you all.